That was a real interview. We shot it in an empty theater, like near Koreatown in L.A., and it lasted a long time, and it was very emotional. Michael laid it all out there. He explained that, he never wanted to do this. He did not want to do it. He was forced into it, and he just tried to explain it to us in the clearest way possible, because a guy who becomes the heavyweight champion in the world, who never wanted to be there, I mean, that is hard to wrap your mind around.
Losing. What is your relationship with losing? Yeah, that's right. That's going to be the topic of conversation today. I'm your host, Yogi Roth, and welcome back or welcome to the Yogi Roth Show, where we try to have conversations around the humanity of sport, whether it's in college football, whether it's overarching sport, or just around high performers. And today is no different. We've got Adam Goldberg. He's the executive producer of the acclaimed documentary series titled Losers on Netflix. That's right. It is titled Losers. And if you haven't seen this yet, I highly subscribe. You go to Netflix right now, download it for your flight on your iPad, or check out a couple episodes. I imagine you're going to binge this series, as they focus literally on some of the biggest losers in sports. And to me, it was a conversation I look forward to having, and it was a great catch-up session for Adam and I. We got to know each other about 7-8 years ago, working on the Elite 11 project together for ESPN at the time, and he's gone on to produce some really special things that all of us have watched if we follow sport. Multiple 30 for 30 films. He's worked on a lot of the top UFC content. He's produced on State of Play, an acclaimed documentary series with Peter Berg, and so on and so forth. He's one of this generation's, I think, best storytellers, and just getting going in his career as well. And this series is a great example of the type of storyteller that Adam is. Speaking of the specific story that we dive into, we talk about losing. And I think it's really important for us to have a relationship with the word losing. For me personally, I never had a great relationship with it. Often I was driven to prove other people wrong instead of prove myself right. I think when I look back as a child, you show me a good loser, I'll show you a permanent loser was a quote that I lived by literally daily. It was up on my wall. Not the healthiest relationship with losing. And now as parents, or as Little League coaches, or as people in our respective professions, we have to deal with losing. And I think it's really important to develop a relationship with the dark side of it, the positive of it, the process of it, versus just the outcome of a W or an L. And Adam and I dive into a lot of those things. I think I really enjoy this conversation. And the last couple convos I think have been really fun around human performance, around branding, storytelling within sport. Check them out at yogiroth.com/podcast. And please subscribe to the newsletter. I'm really proud of the content we put out. Try to kick it to you, show you a couple unique stories or things that maybe you have not seen yet, give you different takes in college football and around the world of sport. Just go to yogiroth.com and subscribe to the How Great Is Ball newsletter. That being said, football, less than 100 days away. Can you believe it? I cannot. It's almost here. All right, that being said, I'm getting out of the way. This is Adam Goldberg. We talk about losers here on the podcast. Enjoy. Oh, and here we are, live in Venice Beach. It's a beautiful day, because that's pretty much what it always is in Southern California. And you guys know me well enough by now. I love storytelling. This whole podcast is built on one question, which is, what does it mean to be human? So we dive into humanity and sports around the globe. And that is exactly what today's guest is all about. You've probably seen the series if you are operating on this planet, Netflix. You probably have it. Well, there's a new series called Losers on Netflix. I'm here with executive producer Adam Goldberg. Friend, I haven't seen you in a while. So this is part catch-up, part podcast. Of course, a lot of celebration around your series. So first and foremost, welcome to the show.
It's so good to be here, Yogi.
It's really fun. So when I tuned into this series and hit play, just like we all do on Netflix, I'm watching on my iPad, and I see executive producer come up, and I see your name. And this rush of joy came over me. And we hadn't talked yet. We hadn't texted yet about it or talked about it. And I just kind of smiled, and I instantly had a flashback to when we first met at Elite 11.
Yep.
And I love asking people who come on this podcast who I've known previously about, what do you remember about when we connected for the first time? And then I'm going to tell my iteration of that story.
I remember you being the sweetest person I've ever met, the most positive person I've ever met. And that's true. Mostly just connecting with the kids, right? Because we went and did those regionals before the actual end of Elite 11. And we nailed it over and over and over again for ESPN, I guess, .com. They were airing those regional pieces. And we nailed it each and every time. We were dialed in. We were having fun. And, you made it so easy on me to get it done.
Well, what I remember is I would sit down on these interviews, and here I was. I've done Elite 11 for a couple of years. And for those that don't know, think American Idol for high school quarterbacks. We'd go around the country, about 12 to 15 stops. Take the top quarterbacks from the nation, about 1,000 of them, bring the top 20 to Los Angeles, and then we'd figure out the top 11 in America, and then the ultimate MVP. Adam was a producer on that series. So we hit the road. And in previous years, we didn't necessarily have a lot of people like you, the field producer, somebody who knew what they were doing on set. And I was doing a lot of the interviews. So all of a sudden I remember walking into, it was like a high school locker room. It's all lit. It's beautiful. And you're doing interviews with some huge names.
I remember it. We were in Ohio, right?
Yes.
With Malik Zaire.
Shane Morris, Luke Del Rio.
Yep.
It was a loaded regional camp.
Yeah.
And I sat back and I just watched you interview. And you have this great style to you, at least this is my interpretation of you, where there's no wasted words in your questions. And to talk that way with a 17-year-old, I was fascinated because they got it, and they didn't need quote unquote kid gloves. And you were super respectful, but you had this way to get right to what you needed. And as I've learned in the 10 years since then, the efficiency in production and in storytelling is a huge element and a great art form. And from that day on, as we would go around, you and me and Mike and Seth and the whole crew, and you do that everywhere, man. I was really always amazed by how you could just figure it out so quickly.
Thanks, man. I mean, I think part of it is, I always go back to growing up, right? And being around all different kinds of people. I grew up in public school in South Carolina. There were rich kids and poor kids and military kids and Asian kids and all different, and I'm friends with everybody. Just my personality, everybody really got along, right? And I think that helps so much in this job as you move forward because you are dealing with every different kind of person. And look, as far as 16, 17-year-old quarterbacks, we all feel like we're children, anyway, so it's easy to get back to that place, right? And being a fan of ball and really talking to those kids because, some of those kids, one of those kids was Jared Goff, you know what I mean? And you never know who these kids are going to be. And relationships are big in this business no matter what. So, it's always best to be cool and try and get on the level of the subject no matter who that person is.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. I got to do the preseason games for this new league, the Alliance of American Football. And one of them, Christian Hackenberg, was a starter. And Christian and Jared and Max Brown were all there. And if you look at those three young men, Jared was the number one draft pick, just played in the Super Bowl, as everybody in the world probably knows. Max Brown has since retired from playing, got injured, left SC, went to Pitt, and now he works for Gary Vaynerchuk in New York City. He was an apprentice for me last year. I was teaching him how to be an analyst.
Wow. And
then you look at Hack, and he never played a snap in the NFL. And you remember at the time, he was the dude.
He was the guy. He was going to be the guy. And everybody picked that guy. Matt Schleff, to all his credit, he picked Jared Goff. I'll never forget it. Wow. He was like, yo, Goff is the guy.
Wow, I didn't know that. I give him props.
Yeah.
All right, well, you're the guy, too. And I went back and just looked at, some of the things that you've done. And I always knew what you did. But when you look and take a 10,000-foot view, and I just give the list of state of play, 30 for 30, Rand University, Pony Excess. A lot of the stuff with UFC. We mentioned Elite 11. We worked on the series depth chart together at ESPN. Game Changers on NFL Network. And many others. But I look at that and I'm like, you've been around some elite performers.
Sure.
So that being said, what prior to this doc series titled Losers on Netflix, prior to this series, what was your relationship with losing?
Oh, man. I think we've all lost, right? Whether it's a job or a girl or a house or whatever it is, we've all lost, right? So we've gone through that. Certainly have lost the girl. Certainly didn't get the job at some point. Certainly wasn't the favorite at certain places. I think we've all gone through it, and it's easy to kind of get to that place, which is why this was so special. Mickey Douget created this series based off of a short film that he did on a racehorse in Japan. It's called The Shining Star of Losers Everywhere. You can check it out online. But it was a racehorse in Japan that lost over 100 races and never won. And it was during a recession in Japan, and it galvanized the country for its fortitude, and it saved this racetrack. And he began this idea of noble failure, right? Where there's nobility in losing. And I think that's cool. So he developed this series based off of that. And, when I saw the deck, when we talked for the first time, I was like, dude, I got to be a part of this.
When you were growing up, you referenced earlier where you grew up. How is losing defined? Because I say that because I think as kids, we have this archetype around, the idea of certain words. What does it mean to win? What does it mean to lose? What does it mean to have Halloween? What does it mean to have Christmas? What does Hanukkah look like? So for you, what was losing?
Okay, I mean, when I was like 10, I got on this classic soccer team, right? It was like a travel soccer team. It was a big deal. I mean, it was a big deal to make that team. And I broke my arm like a week later in the different soccer game. So I couldn't go to camp with this team, right? And so I didn't end up on this team that ended up like winning some championships and things like that. And there was a team that was put together with the people who, and gosh, I haven't thought about this until you asked me this question. The team was put together with the people who didn't make the 1977 team and the 1978 team. Those are the years we were born. I was the 78 team. So we called ourselves the Rejects, right? We were the Reject. We were the team that, put together of the people that were like an expansion draft almost. You know what I mean? And we played really hard. And we didn't win any championships, and we won a lot of games, and there was a lot of fire in that team. And that was one thing that I remember being proud to be a part of, even though we weren't, the best team.
That's amazing. The Rejects, right? But I say that because I think there's this point in our lives. I can remember being 6 years old. I grew up in Dalton, Pennsylvania. 2,500 people, no stoplights. The only thing that really existed was high school football. And I can remember being the last guy picked during basketball. And I can remember dedicating my whole summer to saying, you know what, I'm never going to be the last guy picked again.
And that's, for you as an athlete, right? I think the great athletes have that mentality, right? Like to be motivated enough to go out and shoot all day long. And I have so much respect for athletes. Spending time around boxers, and football players and these guys, there's so much work that goes into it, and it's great to be around it. It also makes you feel like shit sometimes because you're not as motivated as they are. But I think that's what makes a great athlete, right? Is that, and you don't even have to be the best, but to be motivated enough to try and try and try and try to get there, even if you don't win. I think there's so much nobility in that.
Yeah, man. I can remember when I played. I have one picture in my home of me playing in college, and it's a picture against Miami. It's Thursday night football, and Thursday night football back in the day was like Monday night football. It was a big deal in college, right? In college, now they play every day of the week. But back then, it was a big deal. And last play of the game, we're going to beat number one ranked Miami. They won 30-plus games in a row. And I looked at the quarterback, and this is a guy who I had worked out with for 2 years, every Sunday when everybody's asleep, right? Like we were on the same page. And I run a post route, and he throws it, and I'm wide open, and I get over the top of like Antrell roll. This is like the Sean Taylor area, right? Or era. And he throws it to me, and he throws it over my arms. And the front page of the Miami Herald is the ball about 6 inches beyond my arms. Now, mind you, it's 4th and 9, and Larry Fitzgerald is wide open at the sticks, right? And he decides to throw it to me. And it took me a while to deal with that moment in my life. And the reason I have the photo up now, because it reminds me that all the stuff that went into that moment is the essence of me versus just the finality of the moment. Process versus result-oriented mindset. I say that to you because I'd imagine you sat down with so many people and looked at so many stories where you're like, okay, this person lost, whether they lost 100-plus straight races as a horse or it was a boxer. There's the stories we're going to get into here in a moment. But what did you look for? And what do you look for in terms of people that have lost to make a compelling story that you may want to tell?
Well, I think, and it goes back to, Mickey and his creative vision for the show. It was all about finding inspiration at the end, right? People that have come out the other side. to do something positive, to take something positive from that, right? I think that was the first thing. The second thing was time. Since that failure, we'll call it a failure, since that loss, time to reflect. Most of the stories that we did were 20, 25 years old. They give these people the time to reflect and to learn. When you're, Jean Van de Velde, who, is probably the biggest choke. If you type in the biggest chokes in all of sports, Van de Velde's going to be there. And so to talk to him, 19, 20 years later, there was a lot of perspective gained, and doing things like becoming a UNICEF ambassador, but getting that I guess you'd call it job because of his infamy and owning that and like moving forward with his life, and I think that's so powerful to be able to get to that place, because I think there's a lot of us, and I don't even know how I would react if that were me. I have no idea. I'd like to think I'd act like Jean, but I don't know. I mean, it's tough. So to get through that, I think that was what we were looking for, is people that came out the other end.
Man, you went 8 for 8, and I'm going to get into those stories. But before we do that, I got to give a big shout out to, I got a new partner on this podcast, and it's the first time I've ever read anything like this, so I'm extremely stoked. Recently partnered with Kona Red Coffee, and Kona Red, if you don't know about it yet, check it out at KonaRed.com. But they source some of the rarest, sought-after coffee legitimately on planet Earth. And it's grown, and you'll love this, on the volcanic mountain slopes of Hawaii.
Yeah, beautiful.
Beautiful. Who doesn't want to go there, right? They thrive in that rich soil in Hawaii. And it's pretty cool because the detail is pretty specific of literally every coffee cherry is handpicked when it's at its best, when it's at its peak ripeness. And the beans, of course, get roasted in-house. It's great quality. It's great freshness. And they got coffee if you want it hot. They got cold brew. My buddy Sam Darnold, he is drinking a lot of this prior to every game. He's one of the guys on the Kona Red team. And they have this really cool juice called the Hawaiian Cascara juice. So it's pretty rad. They got a bunch of different products. I think it's some of the best coffee on planet Earth. And you can find it at Vaughn's, Albertsons, Pavilions, Ralph's, Bristol Farms, Sprouts, and of course at KonaRed.com. And what I love about coffee, man, is that it can create and inspire conversation just like this. And we're having this podcast over a cup of Kona Red. So that being said, some of these stories was, because the first one I watched was the boxing one. And I was like, who am I watching? Because at first glance, when you look at the image, I'm like, is that like Riddick Bowe? Is that, but like, who is that? And then you dive into the story, and I had no clue who Michael Bent was.
Honestly, neither did I. And, I worked on 24/7 for years. I'm supposed to know a lot about boxing. I didn't either. In the 90s, when heavyweight boxing was king, it was, or 80s, 90s, it was Tyson and Lewis and Holyfield and Bowe and those guys that I'd never heard of Michael Bent. That was a story that came to us. Mickey, let's see, I can go backwards a little bit, but the initial deck that I saw, I'd say 4 of our 8 shows were on that deck. The Bent one was one we found after the show had already been greenlit. Bryn Jonathan Butler is a writer, is a friend of Mickey's, and he had been trying to pitch this story to magazines or whoever would listen to him, and nobody would take it. So he was in our office, and he was like, dude, I got this story, Michael Bent. And he told us kind of a quick Cliff Notes version of the story. I was like, dude, we're in. Let's get him on the phone right now. And we got him on the phone right then. And he was so charming and so eloquent and all in and understood what we were trying to do. And it ended up being, a great episode. It was one that we chose to put first.
And I bring that up because, I'm in the football world, a lot of college football and a lot of recruiting. A lot of parents are over the top in recruiting. And when I saw this, I felt for him. You feel for everybody because they're all different stories, obviously. But for Michael, like his dad seemed like just
brutal.
Like it seemed like he didn't care about him, And look, everybody's got different paths, but for those that haven't watched the series, this is a guy who's a boxer and then all of a sudden becomes a world champ as an amateur, becomes a pro, and just gets smoked. And he has this abusive relationship with his dad. When you were talking to him, What was that like? Because I love the settings. You did it so many different ways.
It was real, man. That was a real interview. We shot it in an empty theater, like near Koreatown in L.A., and it lasted a long time, and it was very emotional. Michael laid it all out there. He explained that, he never wanted to do this. He did not want to do it. He was forced into it, and he just tried to explain it to us in the clearest way possible, because a guy who becomes the heavyweight champion in the world, who never wanted to be there, I mean, that is hard to wrap your mind around. And it was an emotional time for him to get it out. We certainly had to, pause a couple times, and not just, for him, for all of us, I think, to catch our bearings and, to give everybody a break and make sure, we're getting what we need and all that kind of stuff. But it was real. Michael is an amazing storyteller. And not only that, and you can see it in the film, but people love him. I mean, Ron Shelton loves him. Mickey Rourke loves him. Freddie Roach loves him. I mean, he is, Harold Perrineau loves him. He is connecting with a deeper, place now that he's kind of out here and doing his thing out here. But from where he started and where he ended up is, it's amazing.
Yeah, I'd highly recommend everybody to watch the series, but that one in particular, that one got me on a bunch of levels, especially around like the parenting thing and how it impacted him. I mean, this is a guy who was on top of the world, and he wanted just his dad to say, I was proud of you.
Yeah.
Did a nice job.
Yeah.
So
I found it so telling. I guess, he wins, the title or whatever, and you can see in his interview, he's like, yeah, F you. Like, F you. That was what was in his brain, not celebratory. It's like, F you. So it still goes back, to the parents. And like, I mean, I'm a parent of a 5-year-old kid, and it's like, we're just starting T-ball and 5-pitch or whatever, baseball. I learned so much from this show. Obviously, I don't think I would ever have been anything close to that to Michael's father. But, you learn to check yourself and to, look, let these kids have fun and let them do whatever they want to do. There's no reason to pressure somebody into doing something, especially physically.
Yeah, so did you do all interviews?
No,
okay.
I did some. Okay. I certainly did some. Mickey did some. I did some. It was a collaborative effort with our team all the way through.
So I'm curious though, on your way home, you come home, you reference you had a little guy. What are your conversations like with your wife or your son after you learn about somebody's dad? Or, I mean, my second favorite one was the running one. I mean, that was just crazy just the way that you animated it. And I want to get in the style of it here in a second, but when you come home after wearing a lot of those long interviews, what's that like for you?
It's interesting. For this show, we did it out of New York. And this is something, I guess, a little different. But we did the show out of New York. Mickey's from New York. The production company, Topic Studios, is out of New York. They wanted a New York showrunner. They got me. Mickey and I clicked. So I moved to New York for 6 or 7 months to do this thing, which goes back to the question you asked about my wife. She got a special thanks in the credit. She deserves more than that, because if she would have said, don't go do this, I don't want you to leave to go to New York for 6 months, we have a 4-year-old in preschool, then I wouldn't have gone. But she was like, go do it. This is something you want to do, you need to do, it's a special show, like, go do it. So it was from afar, like talking, to my wife. There was a lot of FaceTime and things like that, but when, like you referenced the Sahara episode, I mean, we went out to Morocco in the desert in the Sahara. But I FaceTimed her from the airport or the hotel. Like, you have no idea where I am and what I'm doing right now and who I'm talking to. And it's wild. I mean, it's wild. But yeah, I mean, some of that stuff's deep and it stays with you. I think I tried not to lay it so much on her, but it was more like within our crew of people that we traveled around the world with. I mean, we were in it. We were on the road for a long time and going from place to place.
All right, so explain that episode for people that haven't watched it, because I watched that, and that was another one that was gripping, because it seemed as though it was about a guy who was a love turned into an obsession around a sport.
Absolutely. I mean, again, that was a story that Mickey had found. That they had talked to Morrow for a long time before we ever started going, and finally it was time to go, and we went. The story is about a man from Sicily who is obsessed with running, and he went in the mid-90s to the toughest race in the world called the Marathon des Sables in Morocco, and it is 120 miles through the Saharan desert. And after a couple days, he and his buddy who he was running with got into a sandstorm, and Mauro got lost for 4 days in the middle of the desert with basically nothing. And what he did to survive and how he survived is an amazing story that you all should watch. And, Mauro is a character. I mean, he's a character, and he's not apologetic, about who he is and what he is, right? He's obsessed. I think he's certainly learned over the years, but he still has that in him. And you hear from his ex-wife exactly kind of, who he was, certainly at that time, and what he was going to do. And you know what? Part of me thinks, it's okay. Like you can't run from who you are sometimes, and maybe, and no pun intended with the running, you can't run from who you are. Mauro is one of those people that cannot, he has to be who he is. And I respect him for that.
Yeah. I thought it was beautiful in the way that we can compare and contrast stories, right? We just talked about the one in Morocco, and you watch it and it's like, oh my God, like this guy went through clearly a lot and sacrificed a lot and put his family through a lot. And then you go to the Iditarod in Ali. That story to me, you're halfway through and you're like, all right, it's done. And it keeps going. At first it's about a woman who's in the Iditarod, the dog sled racing, and she finishes second 3 straight years, right?
Yeah.
And
yeah.
And we think that's like, okay, that's her lesson. She took second place. And then what happens?
Yeah, I mean, a crazy scene, just like, and it's odd we're talking about it now when you're seeing the stuff with the NBA, right, and like fans on the sidelines. But what happened was somebody came in on a snowmobile who was wasted, drunk, and attacked her during the middle of the race, out in the middle of the Alaskan nowhere. Attacked her with a snowmobile, and it was a very, very, very scary incident. And she ended up finishing that race. I mean, the guy ended up going to jail for not as long as maybe he should have, but a really scary incident. And Allie has become, stuff of legend up there. She just finished, I think she finished 4th this year. She was in first place for a little while, and then, she had to take her mandatory break. And again, we were kind of rooting for her, but I mean, she's a legend, and she's just an amazing person. I mean, to be able to, it's 1,000 miles, 12, 14 dogs, I mean, think about that, and being out in the middle of that, and then somebody attacks you, and to have the fortitude and the courage to finish the race. I mean, oh my gosh, she's just an amazing person.
I mean, courage is an interesting word that comes up, I think, with every one of these, right? The courage to get past a relationship with your dad, potentially. For Michael, the courage to chase your passion, potentially, if you're a runner, right? The courage that you just referenced with Allie. And then there's the courage of the figure skater. I never knew that story. Can you share that with our listeners? I don't know how many people know.
It's funny. I didn't know that story either. My wife did, which I guess for people that watched figure skating in the 90s, it's easy to overshadow Surya Bonali, because of the whole Nancy Kerrigan and Tanya Harding thing, and that's who people were paying attention to. But Surya, is a black figure skater from France, adopted to white parents, who was a gymnast and a fencer and had all this athletic ability. She was a champion in these sports, and then kind of got into ice skating, and taken, under the wing of this amazing French coach and brought up, and she could do things on the ice that nobody could do. And she was not winning these big tournaments, big events, because they said her artistry wasn't good enough, that she was too athletic, that she had an exotic look, all these kind of racial undertones in a subjective sport. And it came to a head. Without giving it away, Surya, she gave her own sort of protest and kind of wanted to show the world, look, I'm not being treated fair. I'm not. Okay, it's a subjective sport. I get it. I'm going to, she tried to play by the rules as much as she could, and she still wasn't getting what she and a lot of people thought she deserved. And it was, looking back on it, it's extraordinarily powerful. When we're talking about, women's rights, or, whether it's, racial equality and all those things. It's a very timely story, and Suri is a champ, man. She is just a champ. And I think the one thing that people know about her mostly is that she could do a backflip and land on one foot, which is illegal in competition. But she could do it. And when she was out of the amateur world of skating, she was allowed to be free. And that was so poetic and cool.
There's something really unique about losing, right? Like, we grew up in the no fear t-shirt era. Right?
Yeah.
The second place is the first loser on your t-shirt. I grew up and I had a poster on my wall that said, "You show me a good loser, I'll show you a permanent one." Like, how sick is that? Like, that's just, it's highly competitive. I get it. And I ask you that based on, like, how should we talk about losing? Because there's a world now that we live here in Venice and Southern California and the West Side that's everybody gets a trophy, right? Everybody's amazing, which is great. Like, that's cool. But there's also sharks out there in the highly competitive environments. We see it. We live it. You've clearly done a doc on it and been around it your whole career. So I wonder what you think about that now as a parent.
I think it's something that you don't necessarily strive for. Nobody wants to lose, right? But it's something you have to accept because it's going to happen, right? I think it's as simple as that. You have to respect people for trying hard and doing their best and enjoying what they're doing. Nobody wants to lose. You think, Jared Goff wanted to lose the Super Bowl? Yeah, he's a great guy. He's a great quarterback, and hopefully he'll get his chance to get back. You work so hard to get to this place, and to lose would be just devastating. But it's something as fans, as friends, as family members, as participants that we just have to accept. It goes back to what I was talking about earlier. Everybody doesn't get the job every time. You don't get the prettiest girl at the party every time. You know what I mean? It's not realistic. And I think that's kind of how we need to look at losing, that it's part of life. Should we treat losers, better? Ask Bill Buckner. It was hell for that guy for a long time. But now they've made their peace with him. The Red Sox won again. He's welcome back at Fenway Park. I'm sure it probably wasn't the easiest situation for him or his family or whatever. But you get through it and you accept it. Hopefully time heals all wounds when it comes to huge losses like that. But as immediate, in our lives loss, I think we just have to accept it and always strive to be the best. You want to win. You want to get the job. You want to get the girl, all those kind of things. But when you don't, it's obviously not the end of the world.
So you've been around some people that have won as well, and sometimes prematurely, maybe to their maturity. So you see somebody wins and all of a sudden they got the nice car, the big house, and they're living a totally different lifestyle. When you compare that and being so far outside your box of comfortable internally, right? A lot of times when you win and you're the Super Bowl champ, you're projected upon this stereotype. If you're supposed to be this, number one draft pick, you're supposed to be that, versus losing. What are your thoughts when we talk about winning now and the success that sometimes that allows for people compared to what you just referenced?
Well, I think you get away with a lot more, right? That's just our culture in general, right? Celebrity or fame or whatever you want to call it, you can get away with anything. And that's the part that's not so good about it. Look, there are great winners out there, but there's also people who don't know how to deal with it. Like you said, you come from a certain place or background, and all of a sudden, even if you don't, and all of a sudden you're 22, 23 years old, you're a multimillionaire and everybody in the world knows who you are. I get that. I get not being able to kind of function in that world. But you get away with a lot more, certainly, if you win.
Do you think that winners who maybe are thrust into the spotlight earlier than maybe they're ready for, do you think those types of winners are more apt to handle life than the losers that you just interviewed?
That's a good question. I think it's really hard if you're so big, young. I think that's got to be so difficult, right? Because you can only go down, right? It's never going to be as good as that moment, and to keep going up and up and up and up, right? Yeah, there's only so many, Leonardo DiCaprios, and there's a lot of Corey Feldmans. You know what I mean? If that's just kind of the way it is, right? It's hard.
Yeah, I've been been touring around a lot of the preschools here in Southern California, right? And they're great, and everybody tells you how great they are, and they're phenomenal. And I'm walking out of it, and I'm saying, there needs to be a school of grit. Like, maybe we need that. Maybe we need to teach that, because we're teaching a lot of, how to share. We're teaching a lot of how to operate together, how to be harmonious, right? How to communicate more effectively. But do you think that where we're at now, I go back to the point of everybody gets a trophy, are we losing an element of, like, training people, like some of the elements of what the highest performers have always had?
Absolutely. I mean, look, everybody's, so ADD now, right, that they're not going to focus on one thing for too long. Yeah. I mean, I'm a father to an almost 6-year-old, and, like, I want him to try and, like, play hard and, like, get dirty and, not fight, but, like, get tough if necessary. I don't want him to get pushed around in any way. I want him to stand on his own 2 feet. And I think that's happening less and less. I'm sure our parents' generation would call us wimps compared to them, and we're going to call our kids wimps compared to us, and maybe that's true. So, yeah, I do think we need, we can't be so touchy-feely all the time, although, look, we have to show our kids what's right and wrong, and that's obviously more important than winning a game, right, is to share and to be kind to all human beings. So it's certainly a fine line. It's fun as a parent to kind of navigate it all. But, yeah, sure, it goes back to, you want to win. You want to do well. You want to try as hard as you can. But if you don't, it's okay.
Yeah, I read an article on you guys in the New Yorker, and there was a quote that said, if we learn from defeat, then we should pay a bit more attention to those who lose. And I thought that was really compelling. And there's a lot in just that sentence, right? Because what do? You win, and they're on SI, you get the Wheaties box, I'm going to Disneyland, like all the stuff that happens when you win. And when you lose, we're going to see it in March Madness, right? The interview with the coach after the loss, or the interview after the Super Bowl. Maybe one guy addresses the team, but we kind of just forget about them when they walk out of the facility, the arena that they've just competed in. With that being said, what have you learned around the sporting culture about those who lose?
Man, I mean, first, it's hard to get an honest answer a lot of times after those, especially in the moment, right? You get the pre-programmed, coach, those kids are the best kids I've ever had, and they tried hard and all that stuff. But, man, it's hard in the moment. A quick aside, I was in the locker room with Manny Pacquiao when he got knocked out by Juan Manuel Marquez, and Manny went flat. I don't know if you remember that. There were memes after it. Manny went flat on his face, and it was the first time. It was a devastating knockout, and there were women crying, and Manny whatever. And Manny was getting in the ambulance. He skipped the presser. He was going to the hospital. He was going to get an ambulance, and there's women crying, but Manny was okay. Manny had a smile. Manny knew he lost, but, like, he was cool. His bell might have been rung, but, like, he was cool. So I think those around him were freaking out. But he understood as a competitor that when you go into that ring, you might lose and you might get knocked out, and I think that's a competitor. That's a true competitor.
What do you feel about people's relationship with fear? Fear of failure, fear of I'm going to lose. I mean, you just talked to some of the most epic losers, in air quotes, of all time.
Yeah, I mean, I think some people are more scared to win than they are to lose. I think it's backwards in certain cases. Fear of failure pushes a lot of people. I've talked to a lot of people who come from, very humble backgrounds who they just couldn't do it anymore, and they had to succeed, and they did, and that's impressive. When people like that push themselves to change their situation, or whether it's their family or their own or their careers or whatever it is, I think that's so impressive, right? I mean, you and I live in Venice Beach, right? There's a lot of people who maybe don't work so hard and diligent, and you see it, and things like that. I mean, but obviously they're doing something right because they're here and doing it. So you always kind of wonder, but then you go back to the people that really push themselves and really try and make something of themselves. And those people are going to win no matter what, even if they don't get that first job. Keep going back to that, which they might not because they don't have the resume. But if you keep pushing, you can do it. And I meet with a lot of kids, not kids, 21, 22-year-old kids. They want to get in the business. They're a friend of a friend. And I always take the meeting because maybe I have a little something to tell them. And I'm like, look, if you're working harder than everybody else, you're already so far ahead because there's so many people that aren't working that hard, right? You Larry Bird at the Garden, 4 hours for a game, knocking down 1,000 threes. If you're working that much harder than everybody else, you're going to end up, you'll be fine. You may not make it to the top of the mountain. Nobody can guarantee that, but you're going to be okay. And that's what it takes.
Yeah, there are some simple truths, I think, to success. Right, and clearly competitive temperament, work ethic. We always ask quarterbacks, do you love what the game does for you, or do you love the game and what you can do for it? And it's always fun because it's okay to live in either world, but let's just talk about it. If you're living in the one that you want just the game to give you shine, that's called recruiting, right? That's pretty much what goes on now. You're going to get asked this a lot, I think, in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, to reflect back on what was that moment, that unexpected moment in this series that you experienced? I'm curious, at this point, it's freshly just been released. What is that for you?
Gosh, I wish I had something specific, but Yogi, my job, and more sports analogies here, was kind of a general manager, right? Mickey and I put together a team of people, and just like in anything in business, in football, whatever it is, it's the team. Like, you can't do anything without a solid team. The way that our crew, and I'm starting to get emotional about it, the way that our crew made this show is like nothing I've ever seen. Everybody pitched in. There were story producers and post supervisors and archive producers, and it wasn't the biggest team in the world. And people took, time away from their families and worked 20 hours a day, and we flew around the world. And this business, look, nobody's getting extraordinarily wealthy, right? It's awesome, we all make a living, but nobody's getting super rich over it. So it wasn't about that. It was about putting something together that we all believed in, and from day one everybody was on the same page. And to see it through, and to see it air, and to see it get the response that it's gotten, unreal.
I love that. You can tell that you're obviously in the business for the right reasons. Well, what's it like? And this is a simpleton question, but you got a series on Netflix.
Yeah,
it's pretty cool, bro.
It's amazing. I mean, dude, they tell you, look, you're going to be in 190 countries, in all these different languages, and okay, like, you conceptualize it, but now it's out, right? It's been a few weeks. The press has been so nice. The crazy part is translating articles written in other languages about our show, right? Like, there's papers in Singapore, and I saw things in Thai, some Peru and Argentina and Brazil, and I mean all over the world. Mickey did a radio station interview in Australia, in England, and Canada. I mean, it's really global, and it's the power of Netflix, and it is unbelievably cool. It's so cool. I mean, look, I worked on some things that the people have seen over the years, certainly domestically big things, but this is a whole other game.
So what does that do for you as a creative?
I don't know. I mean, we'll see. I'm again so lucky to be a part of this show. There might be a second season. We don't know yet. I don't know. I'd like to think it would give me options. But, I think you just keep doing what you're doing, grinding. I've always kind of, been just going with where the wind takes me at one point, but also, thinking about what's next, and I think there's a nice mixture of the two, and something will land. I think it's look, show running a Netflix series is a a feather in the cap. But again, if it weren't for Mickey, if it weren't for Topic Studios, if it weren't for the people who were on our team, nobody's doing anything, right? I'm not getting love or things like that, but I think everybody on our team has this feather in their cap, and everybody on our team is going to be able to do and continue to do amazing things because they're really, really good at their jobs.
That's so good. What makes a good story in your eyes?
Oh, man. A motto I guess I've had for a while is tell me some shit I don't know. I think there's a lot, certainly in the sports world, as a sports fan, as somebody who grew up and reading and watching and, living on SportsCenter or whatever it is, there's so much that we know, at this point. And again, that was the pleasure of this, is not knowing any of these stories except Jean Van de Velde. That to me is awesome because, you're making it as a viewer also. I mean, I'm a fan of all this stuff. I watch all this stuff. I watch everything that comes out. For the most part, I watch everything that comes out. And not to say that those things aren't great. I watched the Dion 30 for 30, and it was captivating. I mean, he is a captivating man, But at the same time, I knew more or less that story, So, there's nothing wrong with a blockbuster. But there's also something really cool about telling me something that I've just never thought about.
Yeah, we've been in this industry for a while now, and I've done it, you've done it. You pitch a good idea, and they're like, "Cool, can you add so and so, a household name?" And I'm always like, "All right, cool." Like, probably not really about the story, but I get why you'd want to go do that. Mm-hmm. So I think that's really neat because I think we lean into what we don't know. There's so much access now on our hands and our mobile device. Whatever we want, we can Google. But there's not a day in my life that I would Google Michael Bent, let alone Ali, let alone Surya, let alone any of these people.
Sure. One thing that was cool, and Mickey did years of research finding these stories, and then some of them we found, like the Ali story, we have a producer from Alaska. And what are the chances? You know what I mean? But Netflix was cool about, they didn't need celebrities. They didn't need big names, they didn't care. Just tell me the story. And that was so cool, to not have to get, A-list star to be in our thing just to give credence to it, which may or may not give credence to it anyway.
All right. So there's some people that are going to be listening that are studying communications, cinematography in colleges all across the country, Pac-12 footprint, and there's people that just love story. Just take us a little bit inside. What's the process like? Okay, story gets greenlit, you get hired, and you go to capture some of these. Do you have to show rough cuts? Give us an example of how this thing goes out.
Okay, let's see what I can say. So the series, in this case, the series was greenlit. Some of the episodes were already on board. But yeah, you're sending selects from the field. You're showing, rough cuts at certain stages in your post, and you're getting notes from the network, and that's, they're really, really, really good over there. And, going back to the global, power of Netflix, we did a basketball story and a guy did some halftime shows at USC or Notre Dame, right? And that was in a cut. He's talking about USC and Notre Dame. And we got a note back that was take that out. Our global audience has no idea who USC and Notre Dame are. So, you're thinking about it in a different kind of way. And that was so cool and different because, look, coming from the sports world or in the United States, when you can get Notre Dame and USC in, you get Notre Dame and USC in. So, yeah, that's kind of the process. They were really cool. We, got episodes greenlit, a few after the show had been greenlit. And, that process was amazing with Netflix. And, they trusted us. They trusted Mickey. Again, the clarity of his vision I cannot overstate. I mean, this guy knew what he wanted to make, and it was my job to help him make it.
Yeah, there's so many different styles of storytelling, but the way he used animation in this,
again,
really cool.
Mickey is a genius.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a genius. Again, the clarity in it, the precision of it, the aesthetic, it was going to be right. It was going to be the way he wanted it to be, and that was the way it was going to be. And it turned out great, man. He's not only an amazing artist, an amazing director, a good friend, but he was a visionary when it came to this. And I mean, even like the style guides that we did 2 years ago or a year and a half ago at this point, I mean, he kept to it. You know what I mean? This is the plan.
You reference what you say to college kids. We'll get you out of here in a minute. When you first heard about this to now, or a couple weeks ago when it got released, how much time so people can have an understanding?
Mickey and I first spoke in June of 2017 before the show was officially greenlit. It aired March 1st, 2019.
Wow. And when did you come back from New York?
I spent 6 or 7 months in New York. It was about October of 17 to like May of 18. And then we went into animation for a while. And then once we were back in the edit, I was kind of back and forth for the finishing part of it.
I love it. Well, we ask everybody the final same 2 questions over 100 podcasts. The first one, what is it now that you're seeking?
Oh, man. I mean, it's so generic, but it's so true. Just to say happiness. I mean, look, we live at the beach in Southern California. So, as long as I'm here and I can kind of put my toes in the sand every day, I think I'm feeling good. I want my kid to be happy and healthy. I want my wife to have the same things. You know what I mean? Happiness is cool. And as far as professional life goes, I mean, it's all about working on cool projects. You know that. You have to love what you do. And if you don't, you shouldn't be doing it.
And how do you feel about the word limits?
Limits? Oh, man. Yeah, disregard at all costs, right? I mean, yeah, push it. Go for it. Like I said, I mean, you got to go for it. You have to try, right? You can't just sit back and wonder what if. You have to try, and then that's the most important thing that I'm trying to teach my child even. Like, try your best. If you don't like it, that's cool. We'll find something else. But, we need to try.
I'll tell you what, you guys, you crushed it. 8 episodes titled Losers. Athletes whose careers are defined by losing, fortunately or unfortunately. To me, among the 8 episodes, the coolest thing by far was when it ended and I got to see the special credits to Tony and Jack. And I think that speaks volumes of who you are, man. It was really cool.
Thanks, man. Thanks so much for having me, Yogi. It's a pleasure. I hit you up because I knew you would get this show as somebody who thinks much deeper, experiential. The trips that you do, the movies that you make, the work that you do. As somebody who, a like-minded human being, I figured you would dig it. So I appreciate you having me on. You
got it, man. And if people want to get in touch with you, is there a way that you'd recommend?
Yeah, check out southdistrictfilms.com. I have a production company. We're banging it out as always. And, hit us up.
I love it. It's Adam Goldberg. I'm Yogi Roth. You know how we end this thing, that the only limits that you have in life are the ones we set ourselves. Peace.